Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Robert Brandt and I are joined today by Jamie Lickers, Senior Vice President of Indigenous Markets at CIBC. We discussed her role in helping Indigenous communities grow stronger economically. She's also talked about how CIBC manages the largest collection of Indigenous Trust assets in the country.
Jamie Lickers, Senior Vice President, Indigenous Markets at CIBC. It's great to have you back in London. Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, welcome. Great to have you here, Jamie. And thank you for coming earlier to the summit.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was such a wonderful and productive day.
Maybe first, Jamie, tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, your community, and a little bit about your role today and how you got there.
Happily. So, as you know, Rob, like you, I'm Haudenosaunee. I'm a member, though, of the Onondaga Nation, not the Mohawk Nation, from the community of Six Nations, which is in Southern Ontario. So I grew up in my community, which is located fairly centrally in Ontario between Hamilton and Brantford. So fairly urban Indigenous community, not remote by any standards. And I spent my young years there growing up with my family, who still is in Six Nations, and left the community when I was 18, went off to do my undergrad and my legal studies at Queen's University, which I'm a proud alum of Queen's.
As I am.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. We should chat about that a bit more. I loved it so much I went back for law school, despite all of the other amazing options for legal studies in Canada. Great law school. Great focus on Indigenous law, which is what I ended up focusing my practice on. So I'm not a banker by trade. I'm not a career banker.
You're a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer first.
I don't know which is better.
I can tell you which is worse, but maybe we'll leave that for another day. I often joke that I'm a recovering lawyer, although I'm not really sure that you ever fully recover from practicing law. I'll let you know in a few years, but I've only been with the bank for about 4.5 years now. So I joined the bank in the fall of 2020. After about 12 years of practicing law in private practice for 2 big corporate national law firms, but always on the Indigenous side of things. And later in my career, I came to specialize in a distinct area of financial services law for Indigenous clients, primarily developing trust agreements for them when they settled large-scale claims against the government or entered into lucrative resource revenue sharing deals. Most of those communities will take those funds and put them into trust. It still is, I would say, the most popular legal vehicle for holding and managing the assets of the community. And I found that there were not many lawyers at all in Canada that were specializing in the drafting and structuring of trusts specifically for Indigenous communities. So it was quite a niche area. And through that work, I came to work very closely with all of the trust companies in Canada, all of the major trust companies, most of whom are affiliated with the large banks in Canada. And that included CIBC. I did quite a bit of work with CIBC when I was practicing law. They became one of my largest clients. And then eventually they invited me over to head up the Indigenous Markets team. And the rest is history, as they say.
Maybe a bit about the role, and we can compare backstories at some point too, because we've got a similar backstory to yourself. But the title, Indigenous Markets, and is that different from Indigenous banking or Indigenous relations? What does your role involve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the title of the team that I lead at the bank is quite intentional. It's not Indigenous relations and it's not Indigenous banking. And of course, many of our counterparts in the financial industry will have teams and leaders of things called Indigenous banking or Indigenous relations. My position as the leader of our Indigenous markets team at CIBC really reflects the primary lines of business that we operate in, which currently include commercial banking and trust management. So I lead a team of professionals across the country who are dedicated to serving the needs of our Indigenous clients in those two spaces. So our commercial banking team services, for the most part, Indigenous governments as public entities, so Indian Act bands, self-governing nations, Métis settlement councils, Inuit governments, as the public sector entities. And then, of course, we support their related entities. So, as you know, many of them will have economic development corporations. They may run their own health and education authorities. And so we would service those public sector entities, as opposed to serving private clients or privately owned Indigenous business. That's outside of the work that my team does at CIBC. And then on the other side of the business, I oversee a team of trust experts that sit under our CIBC Trust company, but service only the needs and the assets of our Indigenous trust clients. And I'm very proud to say that, to our knowledge, we now have the largest book of Indigenous trust assets under administration at CIBC, totaling somewhere between 27 and 28 billion. It changes every day. New files come in every day.
Can you explain a bit for our audience about the Indigenous Trust business and what's involved in that?
Definitely. Trusts are my passion. It's where I focused my legal practice towards the end of my legal career, and a big part of the reason that I came over to CIBC. So I can talk about Indigenous trusts in my sleep. I can talk about the taxation of Indigenous trusts in my sleep, whether that's good or bad. Again, I'm still recovering from being a lawyer.
But an absolutely growing and booming business, I bet. The number of settlements and the need for expertise to manage settlement funds. As you said, new files every day, I bet.
It is. It's growing so quickly that we admittedly have a difficult time keeping up with the growth of our team and our human capital to service the demand for the services in the market. The number of claims that are being settled is just absolutely exploding. And those claims include individual claims, Rob, as you would know, at the specific claims tribunal, where one particular nation might be advancing a claim related to a breach of a treaty promise or the failure to deliver on some commitment from the Crown, and they would settle that claim on behalf of their nation alone. And those claims can easily be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But now we're also seeing two additional avenues of large-scale settlements. One is the collective advancement of treaty-based claims on behalf of the group of nations that are all signatories to a particular treaty. So last year, we saw the historic settlement of the Robinson-Huron claim, which was advanced by all of the nations who are signatories to the Robinson-Huron Treaty for the failure of the Crown to increase their annuity payments to properly reflect the value of natural resources that was extracted from those territories.
Sorry, can you just give for our audience some idea of the geography? Where is that area located in Canada?
The Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory would be, we say Northern Ontario, but then the folks from the Ring of Fire would tell us that it's not Northern Ontario.
Middle Ontario.
Right. Middle Ontario, up into a bit of the western area of the Great Lakes.
Yes.
So to my knowledge, and I'm not a treaty expert per se, but I believe there were 21 nations that are signatories to that Robinson-Huron Treaty. And they were all promised under that treaty an annuity payment of $4 a year at the time the treaty was signed to reflect the value of resources being extracted from their collective territory. Right. That $4 a year, that amount was never increased, despite, as you can imagine, the exponential change in the dollar value of the resources being extracted. So the settlement was just over $21 billion for those nations.
It was a really interesting legal issue too, as I recall, because within the treaty there was no inflation adjusted provision that said we would increase it or we had to increase that amount every year, but there was a discretionary clause in it about the Crown, I think, had discretion to increase the amount, and but the claim was successful because I think the court said there was discretion, but any reasonable party would treat that. There's no way you could say you exercised your discretion in a reasonable way, given that you never increased that amount, and over time with interest to add it up.
The
Now-
21 billion was a settled amount. It's
Yes.
unclear how much would have been awarded had the issue of damages gone to the courts.
So coming back, the federal government has on its balance sheet $70 billion in terms of liabilities, I think, for claims. Is that
I
approximately
think
the right
they've
number?
set aside, as a reserve that's sort of in their financial accounts.
But this would be outside of that.
This is, the 70 is to come, an amount they expect to come
Right.
yet. The 20, I think, is already accounted for.
Well, similarly, as you would know, there is a companion treaty in the Robinson Superior Treaty area, so the Robinson Huron
Yes.
region where that treaty was signed by the 21 nations. Now we have the Robinson Superior Treaty, which has the same language, has the same $4 annuity payment, which was also never increased by the Crown. And so everyone is waiting to see what the settlement will be on the Robinson Superior Treaty claim, because it's a bit difficult for the Crown to deny liability when they've paid out on the Robinson Huron Treaty.
So just
So billions.
Yes.
It will be billions.
And this kind of Lake Superior, Lake Huron, right? To help people
Of course.
put those names and attach it all. And again, the reference to the Crown, which a lot of people might not understand, because in Canada, everybody kind of has a virtual monarchy because there's not a physical representation of the Crown. There's the Governor General who represents, but all these treaties are with the Crown, which comes back to the federal government. And that is very unique. I understand when we're at the Commonwealth Summit that was before our Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit, because our members who joined us, some of the leaders we had, like Harold Calla, Ernie Daniels, were talking, Mark Palasi, we have a unique structure in Canada because of this relationship with the Crown. But that's a lot of money. So what is the size of the Indigenous Trust market at the moment? And an estimate of what that is, and where does CIBC rank in terms of serving that market?
Well, perhaps, so just to give you a fulsome picture of what we're talking about. So in addition to those individual claims in the hundreds of millions that I talked about, the collective treaty claims like Robinson Huron and Robinson Superior, there is a third stream of settlements that we're seeing now, specifically in the class action space. And there we're talking about class action settlements like the residential school settlement, the child and family services settlement. We're seeing additional class actions being certified right now to advance cases regarding collective harm suffered not by a nation or not because of a treaty right, but just in regard to a failure to provide an adequate level of programs and services for Indigenous people in some
Our firm,
area or
McCarthy
another.
Tatro, has been active in that, acting for First Nations on a clean water class action, which was settled for multiple billions of dollars just a couple of years ago. We've also got one at the moment for housing, the failure to provide adequate housing. So I talk about different streams of rights being advanced. Courts have been very supportive. These claims take sometimes years and years to advance, but a lot of them seem to be coming to a head at the moment. And the courts are ruling in favor of the Indigenous people time after time.
Notably, last year, the child and family services class action was settled for $23 billion.
Wow. So how much, we've got the 70 billion that's for future claims, but the market up till now for these trusts, is it, 50 billion, 100 billion that's available out there for you and others
100.
to compete? So it's plus 100 billion.
Plus 100 billion at the moment, of which CIBC has approximately 27 to 28 billion in assets under management. So a significant portion.
Yes. And that trust money then can it be used with the way the law is structured to leverage for investments? And
that's a great question. That's a really great question. We're finally seeing the evolution of trust law. You have to keep in mind that trusts as legal entities were created for a very different purpose than how we're seeing Indigenous nations use those entities now. Mm-hmm. So they were created for the most part to manage wealth for a small pool of beneficiaries, usually a family. When Indigenous communities started adopting these structures to manage settlement funds, it fundamentally changed the nature and the purpose of the trust as a legal entity. Because now you're talking about holding large pools of assets for a much larger pool of beneficiaries and for very extended periods of time. So a lot of these trusts are structured to exist for 100 plus years, and where legislation doesn't prohibit it, they are specifically structured to last in perpetuity. And the way the trusts are set up, the capital is meant to be maintained and to grow with inflation so that the nation maintains the whole of that capital asset while also producing a reliable stream of revenue for program and service delivery in the community. So over time, we have seen the drafting and the structuring of these trusts really change to recognize the needs of the Indigenous communities as opposed to the needs of wealthy families who may have historically used trust structures. One of those key developments over the last number of years has been the express permission to use trust assets as security for lending. In years past, in many cases, the use of trust property as security was expressly prohibited as opposed to permitted, which left many nations in a position where they had significant assets, in many cases, the bulk of their assets tied and locked into a trust, which had very stringent amendment provisions. They couldn't change, they couldn't access the capital. And the only benefit flowing from some of those older model trusts was an annual payment to the community. And at the same time, they couldn't get a capital loan to build a new community center or to create a residence to keep their aging elders in their community and provide healthcare for them. So they had hundreds of millions of dollars of assets sitting in trust that they can't access. They can't change the terms of the trust. They can't withdraw capital. And they can't leverage it for lending. So lawyers, sometimes we get it right, thought we should probably do something about this. And I think there's a balance to be struck between making it too easy to access the capital and too easy to leverage the capital of the community's largest pool of assets and making it too restrictive such that you're handcuffed.
And you can imagine how controversial sometimes it can be within the community. There's some people who want to just, where's my check today? And there are other people who want to create a legacy that will last 7 generations. And so there's that internal debate about what to do with these funds. There's a settlement term, sometimes restrictive. So there's a bit of a variety. But it's a growing business, and capacity issues. Indigenous communities, not a lot of them have the capacity to really deal with those funds. They're reliant on advisors like CIBC and lawyers and
lawyers
others.
like McCarthy Tétrault.
Lawyers like McCarthy Tétrault to help them manage those funds in the way that the community wants them managed.
Interesting. An analogy from here in the UK, though, that comes to mind for me is with North Sea oil. So Norway was very smart and set up a sovereign wealth fund from the get-go. North Sea oil started really flow during Thatcher's time, and they just used it to fund the current account deficit and the money went out the door. So now that North Sea oil is significantly reduced in terms of the future output of it, here's Norway, very high standard of living, one of the largest sovereign wealth funds, and here's the UK thinking about, oh, we should maybe be setting out a sovereign wealth fund. But all that oil revenue that could have gone into it hasn't. And I think that's what, as you said, it is a contentious issue for any community. Hey, I can get this for today, or I can have something for tomorrow. So there will be obviously a balance struck. Are there foreign firms competing against you for serving that business? I mean, the Canadian banking system has come up in discussions from south of the border in the recent past. Canada's always had a relatively protected market, but it's been served well, whether that's because of the objectives of the banks or the regulatory framework has prevented that. It has been a very stable banking market that's served well, perhaps higher fees, but that's not the question. It's, can foreign firms get in and compete against that? And how does that look?
I'm sure they would like to. I think that one of the challenges for Indigenous communities generally in Canada right now is, for decades, when they needed support and assistance and access to services, all kinds of services, there weren't necessarily many allies there offering to help. And in the last 10 to 20 years, as we see the settlement of claims in the billions of dollars, of course, we see an influx of people that are now interested in helping. And it's a difficult situation because choice in the marketplace is important. And I work closely with my counterparts at all of the other major financial institutions in Canada. And I believe that many of them are doing very good work, as I believe that CIBC is doing great work in the Indigenous space. And we like that our clients have choice. Now, they should have choice. Canadians generally have choice in terms of who they bank with, where they place their assets, how they invest their assets. So it's great that our Indigenous clients have that choice as well. But when you're coming into large, incredibly large sums of money, you do have people looking to come in who maybe don't know how to support the Indigenous community in the way that others might, that see the profit and the revenue to be made. And this is something that our communities have always struggled with. Being able to tell the difference between a trusted advisor and someone who's not putting the best interests of the community first. And they're going to continue to face that challenge. And as you said, the Canadian banking industry, and particularly under the Trustee Act and the rules for regulating as a trust company in Canada are very stringent. They're cautious, rightfully so.
Yes,
I think. And so they may come, they may try to come. They will have a lot of regulatory and legal hurdles to jump through before there's a new trust company on the block. But we've seen new trust companies in the past couple of years, which we view as positive developments. First Nations Bank of Canada, pretty recently, if you think about how long trusts have existed,
yes,
fairly recently in the last couple of years obtained their trust company license. So new players do come to market for sure. And that gives clients greater choice. We hope they still choose us.
Jamie, you were in London for the Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit, the second annual. And I'd be just interested, CIBC, again, we're a big supporter, and you've been with us since day one. And we very much appreciate that support from Wayne Lee and Lisa Wright. It's been a big help to us. But you attended for the first time, and what were some of your impressions?
I thought it was a fantastic day at the summit. The conversations that were being had by the panelists, the speakers, really top notch. These folks are all experts in their field. And whether that's being an expert at the community level in terms of understanding the needs and the vision for Indigenous communities across Canada, some of the Indigenous leadership in attendance shared their stories around what their communities have done, are doing, particularly on the partnership side, in order to bring their vision for their economic future of their communities to life. And then, of course, we heard from a number of industry professionals who have dedicated their careers to supporting the advancement of Indigenous communities in the economy, which now we sort of trendily call economic reconciliation. I think some of us were working on these issues before it was trendy and before we started breaking the word reconciliation into multiple parts and dissecting it. But I'm a business person through and through at the end of the day. When I practiced law, it was primarily on the corporate side, working to advance the economic self-sufficiency and wealth of Indigenous communities. And now on the banking side, I get to continue that work. And I do think it is critically important for reconciliation for there to be a huge focus on meaningful economic participation for Indigenous communities in Canada, because until there's wealth in our communities, our leadership will continue to struggle to manage poverty. And so I would like to see our communities managing wealth in the very near future. And some of them already are.
Yes. And I think that, it's key for the economy as a whole. It's like anywhere, if part of your population is living in poverty, your economy is not going to be productive as it could be. It's not going to realize its full potential. We've seen this with, the economic participation of women in societies. And so this is a mill around the neck. Of course, it's for an Indigenous person in poverty, whoever's in poverty, it's absolutely
all-consuming.
It's all-consuming. But on a larger level, in terms of getting the economy to reach its full economic potential, it is so important to address that. So all Canadians and anybody looking at investing in Canada should be saying, wow, that is great, because they're going to address that. That's going to just drive that economy at a higher level.
I think we heard that many times at the summit. Quite a few number of speakers made that point specifically, that a rising tide floats all boats. And that means that if we can raise up Indigenous people and the Indigenous economy in Canada, it's to the benefit of all Canadians and the world, frankly.
Yes.
And we're in the heart of one of the great financial centers of the world in London. And we're talking about economic reconciliation. There are other forms of reconciliation, but you can only do so much. And I personally believe that with economic development and wealth, other benefits then flow, and a general standard of living and wellness. My brother, who's been involved in the Indigenous sport and wellness community across Canada, it starts with wealth when it's done properly, and economic development, and then all those other benefits hopefully flow.
Agreed. And we're seeing it. It's an incredibly interesting time. It's a great time to be an Indigenous person in Canada, and I'm proud to be able to say that. That was so often not the case for our ancestors, even our parents, our grandparents. But I watch things like the Cheekbone Beauty commercials that are on mainstream television now. I've met Jen Harper a number of times. She's fantastic. Her products are sold in Sephora. There's reason to be hopeful. A lot is changing.
I think so a couple of points, just with our podcast, because we're meeting business leaders, professional services leaders such as yourself, who are Indigenous. It's secondary to the conversation. It's not, oh, look, we have an Indigenous leader, or Rob yourself, because you're that generation who has participated now fully and are using your networks and learnings, et cetera, to raise up the rest of the Indigenous people. And this wouldn't take place even 20 years ago.
No, not even 10 years ago. I don't think. I mean, the speed at which things are moving is really, really impressive.
And that would have been exciting. Oh, look who we have on. It's a lawyer who happens to be Indigenous. This doesn't happen anymore, which is great. And I think
some industries, I think, are doing better than others.
Yes.
The legal profession, I jokingly say that you can't swing a stick without hitting an Indigenous lawyer these days, which is great. That is a wonderful thing to be able to say, and it wasn't the case. But it became the case because when it became legal for Indigenous people to go to post-secondary and to go to law school and to practice law in Canada, Indigenous leadership went back to their communities and said, we have rights that we need to advance and enforce against the Crown, and our own people need to take up these new tools and educate themselves so that we have our own lawyers to fight for us. And we're in the banking and finance industry woefully unrepresented as Indigenous people. And my plea that I make every time I speak in a public forum is to ask our leadership to go back into their communities, make that same plea that we did for lawyers, but for banking and finance expertise. There are so many wonderful and impactful careers available in the banking and finance industry that our young people don't even realize are available. Not just available to them, we want them. I will take anyone that you can give me. And they don't need to specialize in servicing Indigenous clients. We're past that. It's not the time to hire one Indigenous person and put them in charge of your Indigenous clients or your Indigenous business. And I say that as the Indigenous person in charge of Indigenous business at CIBC. But that's my choice. I choose to do this. I want to see Indigenous people on our capital markets team. I want to see Indigenous people in our HR department, in our legal department, in our tech department. We have so many jobs at the bank, at every large financial institution, and Indigenous people shouldn't be pigeonholed into, oh, you're Indigenous? Here, you can go work on our Indigenous markets team. No, we want you on the marketing team. We want you on every team that we have at the bank.
Yes. And I think the kudos to the banks like CIBC and National Bank of Canada and Scotiabank, who have been sponsors for the summit over here in the Square Mile. And that's also a give back and support for the Indigenous people and the businesses, because they're going to connect them with other people in capital markets. The business isn't all going to come to the Canadian banks, but they recognize this is how they have to serve the client base and all Canadians by getting out here.
Absolutely. And we talk about serving CIBC, you're doing more than a trust business. Do you want to mention some of the other streams you've got? I know Longhouse, there was a relationship agreement just announced recently with Longhouse Capital, who are a brand new private equity firm looking to raise money and invest in Indigenous communities, and CIBC is going to support that initiative. But what else is going
really
on?
Proud. We're really proud of that initiative that we've entered into with Longhouse Capital. I think it takes participation from different service providers across the market in order to fully service the needs of Indigenous people. And we don't ever pretend to be everything that demographic needs. And so these partnerships are a huge part of how we can make sure that those services are available and being delivered in an equitable way to Indigenous communities. And so we're really proud of the work that Longhouse is doing and our partnership with them. Of course, we also have a number of other initiatives that we advance outside of the business. I believe in leading with business. I think primarily we're a financial services firm, that the best thing that we can do to advance economic reconciliation is to look at how we provide financial products and services and whether it works for Indigenous communities. And if we can figure that out, we're moving in the right direction. But there are other issues that need to be addressed. Financial literacy, for example. We have, like most banks, a huge commitment to increasing financial literacy and capacity at all levels in the Indigenous community, whether that's financial literacy for young people who maybe have never had to budget before or manage their first credit card, whether it's financial literacy training at more of a professional level for the leadership in First Nations communities. Maybe it's the finance office at the band. Maybe it's financial literacy for elders who are living on a fixed income with the rising costs of everything, might be struggling to budget. The needs are different. The education that is needed is also different. And of course, we have initiatives on recruitment. As I just mentioned, it's a passion for me. I take it as a personal commitment to see an increase in the number of Indigenous people that we have on our team at CIBC. We support a number of scholarships and bursaries specifically for Indigenous students in an effort to increase our attractiveness, both as an industry and as a specific employer at CIBC. And I think we're doing great things. I do. But there's more work to be done. There's always more work to be done.
Great initiatives.
Jamie Lickers, great to see you back in London. And thank you again for yours and CIBC's support of our summit. It was great to talk to you. We could have gone on, but we're almost out of time. So I just want to thank you again.
Thank you.
And Nyawan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to meet you at the summit and opportunity to speak to you again. There's a lot of exciting things that are going, and you've crossed over from legal to financial services. Wow.
Well, we'll continue the conversation next year.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to Jamie Lickers for sharing her insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.